Welcome, everybody. Today is July 15th, 2020. This is the Upper Dublin School District Finance Committee. I will call the meeting to order. We have the entire Finance Committee here and several other board members and administrators. First up, we're going to have a presentation from Dr. Yanni on the Health and Safety Plan. Dr. Yanni.
Thank you, Mr. Sirota. Ms. Evans will pull the presentation up for us. And while she's doing that, I'll remind everyone that per the governor's orders and per the Pennsylvania Department of Education, every school district in the Commonwealth is required to develop a health and safety plan for reopening schools. And that plan has to be approved not only by our local Board of School Directors, but it also has to be submitted to the Pennsylvania Department of Education for approval. So tonight, we're going to update the community on where we stand with our health and safety plan, and we are hoping to have final guidance from the Pennsylvania Department of Health tomorrow or Friday so that we can put the plan, the full reopening plan, out for public view, and we'll be seeking some feedback based upon our plan. The purpose of the plan is to articulate what school would look like if we reopen in two phases, the yellow phase and the green phase. As we know, we're in the green phase, but as if you heard the governor's press conference today, there is some concern in the data that, that the numbers of new COVID-19 cases are not going in the right direction. So we'll talk about a number of those things. But Ms. Evans, you can go ahead and advance the slide. So one of the things that I want to really stress is that we are not building our plan in isolation. We are actually using data-driven, research-based guidance from a multitude of organizations. So the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the Pennsylvania Department of Health, the Montgomery County Department of Health, and the Pennsylvania Department of Education. And in addition to that, we have a number of in-service professionals that are helping us to think about the safety for some certain areas of our buildings and certain processes, such as use of cafeterias, use of gymnasiums, transportation, cleaning and sanitation. So I don't want anyone to think that we're not accessing medical research or medical professionals as we're working on our plan. Today, the governor and Secretary Levine had a press conference, and we, just a few moments ago, I received a text that school districts should be getting some school district specific health guidance tomorrow that will inform our plan. You can go to the next slide, Ms. Evans. Thank you. So we put out an open-ended survey to our community several weeks ago, and we wanted to keep the questions open-ended because we really wanted to hear what the concerns were that our community had without limiting people to answering a multiple choice question or a Likert scale question. So we asked broad questions. What are your concerns about reopening school? What strategies or what solutions might you offer to address your concerns? Because we know that when we all put our heads together, we can usually come up with some good solutions. And then we asked if there was anything else that folks wanted our leadership team to think about in terms of reopening school. And so when we looked at all of that data, we basically took all of our results, we coded everything, and it really came down to two big buckets. We had questions about people and we had questions about places. And so what you see on the screen in front of you is 5 questions about people and 4 questions about places. And the intention here was when we when we did this presentation last week for our community, we addressed each of these questions. So I'm going to address them briefly here tonight, and then I'll go into a little bit of detail later. So the question was, will staff and students be required to wear masks or facial coverings? And when we first started our plan, there was not a universal masking order in place. Since we started working on our plan, though, we know that the governor has now put into place a mandate that says all people age 2 and older must wear a facial covering when they're not in their home. But there are a list of exemptions that you could qualify for, whether you have certain health conditions or disabilities that would allow you not to wear a mask. So, but the answer to that question is facial coverings are going to be required unless you qualify for one of those exemptions. What safety measures is the district going to take to assess the health and safety of students and staff? So it was early on thought that schools and organizations should be taking everyone's temperature to make sure that folks coming into our buildings are temperature free. But the more we talked to doctors and the more we looked at the research, having a temperature, or more importantly, not having a temperature, is not a sign of not having COVID-19. And so later on in the meeting tonight, we will talk about an application that we're going to be using to gather some health data in a really safe and confidential way. But what measures are we going to take? We're going to be asking families some health questions. We're going to be employing some distancing, and we'll talk a little bit about that moving forward. What will happen if there's a confirmed case of COVID-19 in one of our schools? So we have been given a dedicated dedicated liaison to the Montgomery County Department of Health that we can reach out to day or night with questions, concerns, or if we believe that we have someone that is either suspected to have COVID or we know has COVID. That liaison to the health department is going to help guide our decision making. The department will be doing contact tracing. They will provide the most recent and up-to-date data about whether we need to close a school or close part of a school or vacate a classroom. So that liaison to the health department is a really key person for each school district. Will school conditions make students anxious? There was a real trend through our data that where parents were saying, I don't know, is it going to make my child more anxious to be in school, having to wear a mask, not able to be in close proximity to friends or teachers? So that was something that we looked at, and we'll talk about some of the expectations and how we'll teach those expectations to reduce some of that anxiety. And what will learning look like if we have to return to a virtual environment? The one thing that I want to stress, we really listened to the feedback that we got from our community, from our parents, our guardians, caregivers, families, and our kids during the period of remote learning. And while remote learning was what it was at the time to get us through the end of the year, we know that if we have to go into a remote setting again, we need something that's far more robust than simply asynchronous or work away from a teacher. We need real-time interaction between our kids and our teachers. So then we look over at the facilities side of things. And so how will facilities be cleaned and what products will be used? All of the products that we're using are rated to attack COVID-19, right? So I can tell you on any given day, I receive between 12 and 20 emails. I'm sure Mr. Lester receives many more of companies reaching out saying, buy our product, use our product. But we're making sure that all the products that we're using to clean our buildings, to do deep cleaning this summer, and cleaning on a daily basis moving forward is rated to attack COVID-19. Is physical distancing possible? So right now, we're sort of in this amorphous space where there are 16 different organizations that have given advice or guidance to school districts, and none of those 16 say exactly the same thing. And so one of the key pieces of guidance that we're really interested in getting, that we're hopefully getting tomorrow, is what is Pennsylvania going to mandate as a hard, fast rule for physical distancing in our schools? We've gone from 6 feet to 6 feet to the extent possible, to 6 feet when it's feasible, to 3 to 6 feet, to 3 to 6 feet when it's feasible, back to 6 feet. And what we really need is the governor and the secretary of health to really put some definitive information around an answer to that question. How will transportation be handled? We realize that some families may be nervous to have their children ride on a bus coming to school this year. So during the first week of August, we're going to be providing an opportunity for families to opt out of transportation. And even if a family opts out of transportation and they elect to drive their child or children to school, what we don't want anyone to think is you're giving up that right for transportation forever. You'll have an ability to opt back into transportation if you opt out, and all that information will be coming up. But we think that all signs point to that will significantly reduce ridership on buses. And will large group spaces such as gymnasiums, cafeterias, and playgrounds be used? You know, one of the things early on, the suggestions coming from various health departments were to turn gymnasiums into classrooms, into satellite cafeterias. And if we do that, we take away the opportunity for kids to have physical education in our gymnasiums. And so we're looking at how to space kids out in our cafeterias and use 1 or 2 other satellite locations in a building to naturally reduce the number of kids in spaces and create that distance that we know is important between folks. So Brooke, if you can go to the next slide, please. Mr. Hoffman, our Chief Academic Officer, always says, if you want it, teach it. So expectations, and especially expectations right now, need direct, explicit instruction. So typically when our staff comes back to school in late August for professional learning days, we're spending time looking at instructional strategies and data, student performance, new curriculum materials, and all of that's going to happen. But we're going to be doing specific professional learning around health, safety, and hygiene. So we're going to be working with our nursing staff and some local physicians to in-service our staff on recognizing the signs of COVID-19. You know, I think if you ask anyone to rattle off what the symptoms of COVID-19 are, we can probably do that because we hear it all the time. But we really want to have a conversation with our staff about how we can truly recognize the signs of COVID-19. And, you know, as a former teacher, many times during the school year, a kid would come up to me and say, Mr. Yanni, I'm not feeling well. Can I go to the nurse? And we're now in a time where when kids are telling us they're not feeling well, we have to take that. We have to take that as truth and have them checked out. In terms of prevention strategies, we know that hand washing and proper hygiene, such as coughing and sneezing into your elbow, are the most effective ways, to prevent the spread of COVID-19. And it sounds almost too simple and too good to be true. But, you know, when you think about prior to COVID, were we all washing our hands to the extent that we probably should have been? The answer to that is probably no. We know that physical distancing is going to be important, so we'll be talking about how to make that happen in classrooms and how to make that happen in locations like cafeterias and on playgrounds. And we'll be sharing that information as well with our families so that families can start to have conversations with their kids prior to the start of the school year. And of course, facial coverings. We're going to be providing face shields for all of our staff, our instructional staff, and our office staff, because so much of our interaction with kids, especially in the classroom, is nonverbal, and facial cues we know are so important. So we want to make sure that we have protections in place to protect the health and safety of everyone, but that also allows for good teaching and learning to occur. Illness protocols. All schools are required to have a quarantine room. It's a room separate and apart from the nurse's office that will be used, that if a student or staff member are exhibiting signs of COVID-19, that they're put in there as a quarantine space until we can get them out of our building. We're taking an extra precaution of not only making sure that there's good air ventilation inside that room, but air ventilation, we're going to be buying air ventilation machines to be outside of that room so that we don't cross-contaminate air. We mentioned that there are products that are rated for COVID-19. Looking at high-touch surfaces, so light switches, doorknobs, handrails, all those places in schools where we are touching all the time are the places that need to be really cleaned and cleaned well. And so during the day, what you will see is a real uptick in our custodial maintenance staff, making sure that they are constantly cleaning those areas. We're also looking at some products that will allow us to, in between classes, to be able to kill any of the virus that might be lingering on desks. Air filtration, making sure that we have the best quality air filters on our systems in our buildings. That looks different in different buildings. So for example, the high school and Maple Glen have bona fide air conditioning, so a little bit easier in those buildings, but looking at having good quality filters on the unit ventilators in our other buildings. And although we know many people were really happy about having air conditioning at our elementary schools, really being very mindful of when we're using air conditioning versus when we're having open windows so that we have proper air circulation. And then water filtration. You know, when I first started in the district, we talked a lot about PFAS and PFOA, and we started filtering our water where kids would be drinking from. One of the things that has really been stressed as buildings have been closed, to make sure water is still constantly running so that we don't create unsafe conditions by having stagnant water and bacteria living in pipes. So want to assure everyone we have water running in our buildings all the time to make sure that we're not unknowingly putting kids and staff at risk. Next slide, please. So we know that there may be a number of families that are just not sure if they are ready for their kids to come back to us in a face-to-face school setting, and we understand that. I would love to say that there's a vaccine that is going to be available by the time school starts, but based on information that we received just this week, a vaccine could be about a year away, and then once there's a vaccine, the question is, will there be enough vials to be able to, and enough distribution methods to get it out to the masses? So one of the things that we feel really strongly about is our kids deserve to be educated by Upper Dublin. So if you are not yet ready or comfortable for your children, your child or children to come back, we have created something called the Cardinal Academy. So I want to take a step back and I want to talk about the spring. In the spring, we had something called distance or remote learning. There was very little contact time between kids and teachers. It was a lot of asynchronous work. So work would be pushed out, kids would do work, there might be check-ins, there might be office hours, but there wasn't sustained periods of time where kids were actually interacting with their teachers. We've taken all of that feedback that parents and guardians and families have given us. We listened to what our kids were also telling us, and we've built a Cardinal Academy that's going to be based upon synchronous instruction, which means real-time teaching and learning via technology. So when we think about that, Schoology, 6 through 12, Google Classroom, most likely grades 2 through 5, and a great platform called Seesaw for grades K and 1. Next week, Dr. Perez, our Director of Student Services, Mr. Hoffman, our Chief Academic Officer, and Ms. Penner, our Supervisor of Teaching and Learning, will host a series of information sessions to talk with parents and families about the Cardinal Academy so folks can have their questions answered. And then the following week, we will be pushing out information and allowing families to let us know, are they comfortable with kids coming back in a face-to-face setting? Would they like to work or like to have their students enrolled in the Cardinal Academy? And then we have already been having conversations with staff members who will be teaching in the Cardinal Academy. And we feel very confident that we'll be able to have the Cardinal Academy up and running for the first day of school, just like we would have face-to-face instruction up and running for the first day of school. The real draw to this, when folks leave us and they go to cyber charters, they get different curriculum, different teachers. This is our teachers, our curriculum, our instructional programming, access to our special education teachers, our IEPs, our 504s, our GIEPs. And then COVID is temporary, and at some point, we're going to return back to some state of normalcy, right? So if you've been educated in our Cardinal Academy, your transition back into our school buildings will be very natural, because while you've been in the Cardinal Academy, you've been working with our teachers, our curriculum, our instructional resources. So you won't be having a complete disparate experience. Next slide, please. This just reinforces what I just said. I can't stress enough that what will occur in the fall will look very different from what occurred in the spring. And some folks have said, well, the district wasn't prepared in the spring. What makes you think you're going to be prepared in the fall? And here's what I'll say. It's not that the district wasn't prepared in the spring. I don't know that any district was prepared in the spring for walking away from traditional face-to-face instruction and making sense of a pandemic, and at the same time educating kids in a virtual or remote environment. We've been very intentional from the time we shut down, all these months, starting to build structures and develop our folks that they can teach virtually, so that knowing that whether the governor shuts us down and we can't come back to school at all, or whether we're allowed to open for face-to-face instruction, but we have families that opt for this virtual option, that we will be able to provide an Upper Dublin School District quality education for kids, so that when we're on the other side of this pandemic and we're again returned to whatever normalcy may look like, that kids will be able to transition back seamlessly. Someone asked me the other day, are you worried about being able to staff the virtual academy? I can tell you we're not going to have any problem staffing the virtual academy. And I can tell you right now, our class sizes also look really well. So I'm not worried about having to move teachers into a virtual academy and have class sizes balloon, for example. I feel very confident that the structures that we already have in place will allow us to move forward with the Cardinal Academy in the best interest of our kids. Next slide. So we are going to complete our draft plan once we get the guidance. We've been promised the guidance since last Friday, and that's not a criticism of the state. That's just a piece of data. And some folks have said, well, why don't you have a plan? We had our plan already done and ready to go about 2 weeks ago, but the masking order and the surge in numbers and some of the new guidance that we've been getting have sort of derailed or changed course of what we were working on. We're going to be seeking feedback on our draft plan from our staff and from our community, doing roundtable discussions and having additional information sessions if needed. we'll be communicating any changes to our plan. One of the things that we're very cognizant of is we know that 4 to 6 weeks after mass exposure, there could be a real surge in COVID-19 cases, and that could change conditions. So if you think back, 4th of July this year was on a weekend, and if you saw footage from different shore points in different areas, you saw that people were really relaxed. Distancing wasn't going on, masks weren't really being worn, and so it's yet to be determined if we're going to see some spikes moving forward. We will need to receive board approval for our plan, and what we learned just this afternoon is the board will approve a plan with a caveat, or be asked to approve the plan with a caveat that the plan will most likely change. So we'll put language in our plan that it's approved with the understanding that the board and the community will constantly be updated on any evolution to the plan. Again, we have to submit this plan to the Pennsylvania Department of Education for their review. And then once it's approved, then we will be quote unquote cleared to open. And then communicate. One of the things that as superintendents in the county that we've really stressed to the health department is we know people are scared. We know people need answers. And so we know the first time someone coughs or sneezes in a building, that there is going to be some level of anxiety about, kids or staff being sick. And then of course there's always whisper down the lane. So what we've developed in conjunction with the Montgomery County Department of Health is a communication plan that will allow us and allow the health department to remain in constant contact with our community, so that if there are any concerns, if we are seeing folks coming down and being infected with COVID-19, that we can take the necessary steps to protect not only that person, but everybody else. So we will be doing a lot of communication. We've said that every Tuesday moving forward, we will communicate. The first one went out last night. Touch Base Tuesday is what we're calling those. And they're coming through with the subject line COVID-19 to help folks when they do a check of their email, they know that that's an important email from the district. So I did a lot of talking. I'm happy to entertain any questions that folks may have.
All right, thank you, Dr. Yanni. Before we dive into other questions from the committee and the board, just to clarify, because this is our only committee meeting, I think this is our only committee meeting this month, right?
Yes.
So provided this update here, although it's not strictly a finance committee topic. So we'll entertain questions from the entire board at this point. Let's start with Amy.
Thank you. I appreciate everything, Dr. Yanni, that you and the team have been doing. It's been a really tireless effort for months and months. So my three questions, I have them written down. They're all, it's the 3 Bs. Bands, bathrooms, and buses is kind of what I have an interest in today. I know we were waiting for some additional guidance, and I tried to look for it from the National Association of Music Educators around the aerosol study they were doing. Have we heard anything back?
We have. We met with Mr. Horn. Mr. Horn attended their webinar when they released their information. I think marching band, although we've not made a final decision, is going to be a band, and marching band are going to be a real challenge this year because, you think about the particulates and the droplets, you're blowing into an instrument and it's becoming diffused on the other end. And believe it or not, the recommendation is to not only for the student, the musician to wear a mask, but to also mask the instrument to keep the particulates from. So at that point, I think we really have to pull back and say to ourselves, this is not that we don't value music, because we absolutely do, but are we now being, are we taking so many steps to make something work? Is it ultimately worth it?
Okay. Yeah, that's, I had not heard of masking instruments before, but I understand. Bathrooms, I know that's been sort of a topic out in the media, the social media world. you know, in particular, the aerosolization of the flush, so to speak. Any thoughts on specifics around our bathrooms?
So we're going to be turning off air dryers. That's one of the absolute things that we need to do. Around the aerosolization, is that a word?
I don't know. I made it up, perhaps.
If it's not, we are coining it tonight. One of the things that we talk about expectations is actually reminding students, as silly as it sounds, that when you flush, please keep the stall or the bathroom door closed until that flush is done, to contain any any droplets or any particles that might be in the air. Also making sure that we have hand sanitizer and bathrooms, we have access to soap and water, making sure that that's all stocked well and remain stocked, but also, and I should have mentioned this earlier, making sure that we have wipes and hand sanitizer in every instructional space across the district, and in large areas like cafeterias and even in hallways, so that we're constantly keeping good, proper hygiene at the forefront of our minds.
Great. My last question is about the buses. I think you're absolutely right that there will be plenty of parents that opt out of the busing and use their cars or walk, for that matter. For those that do ride, the bus can be challenging at time with behaviors, and there's no other adult other than the bus driver. One thing that I've read about is the possibility of at least keeping some of the windows open, at least somewhat, to mitigate the enclosed space. Is that something we're considering?
Yes, there was a study that said on a traditional size bus, if every other window on alternating on the sides of the buses are left open about an inch, it creates enough good cross ventilation, and that creates a safer condition. So that is something that we're talking about with our transportation department for sure.
Thank you.
Okay, Jen.
Yes. Thank you for all the work you're doing, and I know it's constantly changing. My question is, where are we primarily getting our guidance from? So when I see that hand washing is the primary way to stop it, that's not what I'm reading. Like the CDC saying it's physical distance. So, and I know you said there's a whole bunch, the CDC, the WHO, whoever else. What's going to be our primary source to make these guidelines and decisions?
Right now, we're relying on 3 sources: CDC, Pennsylvania Department of Health, Montgomery County Department of Health.
Did Montgomery County put out guidelines for schools?
They have not yet. We have another meeting with them tomorrow. We saw a draft of those guidelines, sort of a final draft of those guidelines on Tuesday. They did not want to put out their guidelines before the Pennsylvania Department of Health did, because they didn't want their guidance to conflict with the Pennsylvania Department of Health. And so I received a text a little while ago that we should have that tomorrow at our 1 o'clock meeting.
Okay. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Let's go to Titia.
Thank you, Mark, and for the presentation, Dr. Yanni. A question about student movements in the buildings. I think classrooms is one place where we're expecting students to be somewhat stationary, unfortunately. But as students move between classrooms, how would that look like?
So our building principals by next Wednesday have to submit a plan to us about how they're going to stagger movement in the hallways. And that's movement in hallways from the time kids arrive in school, during class change time, and also when they're leaving school. And it sounds like a daunting task, but when you really break down, easier to do at the elementary level because you can, delay a minute or two while kids are going to special and kids are going to lunch. If you think of the middle school, we're in a team concept, so kids are together. So if we do class changes by team, a little bit more challenging at the high school I did make a little bit of a joke that the hallways are wider at the high school than I-95, but still we want to make sure that we stagger class change time. So Mr. Schultz, Mr. Michener, and Dr. Callahan are working on some structures to be able to do that.
Okay, thanks.
There'll be some, if I could just add one more thing.
Go ahead.
There will be some instances where it's not necessarily feasible to make that happen, that we'll have teachers move instead of kids. But we really think, as of our conversations today, that we can make it work with staggering some movement in hallways, for sure.
Okay, Mike.
Hi, thanks again, Dr. Yanni, for you and your team's efforts working in this highly dynamic environment. This is a finance-related question, and I know we probably don't have an answer for this, but have we started looking at the potential financial impact of providing additional hand sanitizer? If we don't have the blowers in the bathrooms, we'll have to provide paper towels. And if just today we started looking at mask, if we need to provide mask, have we started looking at the potential financial impact of that? Which, like I said, I doubt. Hopefully we'll be able to have something like that starting to pull together by our next finance meeting. But also, the second part of the question is, are there any state or federal resources that we can tap into to help us pay for these additional expenses?
Yes, there actually is, and Mr. Henderson, we are looking at all of those costs. So the CARES funding, the stimulus funding, the CARES funding, and the ESSER funding, those resources, those financial resources, you never want to use those for recurring expenses like personnel or things that you're going to have to spend over multiple times. But it is good for PPE and other products. So we have our CARES funds, the ESSER funds right now. We're not sure how they will be divided up once they get released. So right now, there are two ways that those funds could be distributed. If those funds get distributed the way we distribute our Title I funds, we would keep the entire sum or almost the entire sum of that money. And I won't put Mr. Leckman on the spot, but in a second I'll ask him how much ESSER money we stand to receive. If the legislature decides that we need to distribute ESSER money based upon total enrollment in private and non-publics, we will lose a portion of those funds based upon the requests that we get from our non-public schools, because it wouldn't just be based on poverty or Title I data. It would be based upon total enrollment in those private and non-public schools. So we're in a little bit of a holding pattern with that, but Mr. Leckman has been working with the Montgomery County Intermediate Unit. First of all, the county was able to secure a significant amount of PPE that districts have purchased. And then we're entering into some consortium buying through the bid process with the MCIU for some other products. And I'll let Mr. Leckman, if he wants to weigh in on any of that, because he's handling that end of things.
Okay.
Yeah, just on, I think you covered it very well, Dr. Yanni. On the dollars, the CARES ESSER funding, we are, if we receive the full allocation, it would be $144,000. And then the CARES funding that's coming through the PCCD grant would be upwards of $400,000 that would be available to us. So yes, Mr. Henderson, we don't have all of the numbers today. Again, as Dr. Yanni said, working with MC, the Montgomery County Intermediate Unit, we did just start a bid process, which is, it's out on the street now. We're just waiting for pricing back. Mr. Lester is also getting pricing for some potential cleaning products that we're looking at putting in the classrooms to help with cleaning throughout the day. So yeah, we will have more information on that, but a large portion of those increased costs we think will be covered by those federal dollars that are available to us. So certainly more to come on that.
That's great to hear. Thank you very much.
But we will, Mr. Henderson, as we make those expenditures, we will have to submit expenditure reports for those grants. So we will have a running total of all of the costs that are associated with COVID recovery. Sure.
Anticipating this question at future meetings, maybe that can be part of a standard monthly report.
I think so. I think that would probably be best so that there's real transparency, because right now everyone is talking in sort of generalities, and I mean across districts, and it's going to cost, hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars. But I think to the extent possible, we have to put real numbers around it so that we can talk in specifics. So we're happy to put that together.
Okay, thank you. Stan.
Yes. Dr. Yanni, when do we need to submit this plan to Pennsylvania Department of Education? And after we do submit it, did they give you a time frame of when our plan would be approved or need to be modified?
Yes, so we can submit our plan. They are requesting that plans be submitted the week of August 3rd, and they're promising a 48-hour timeline for returning those plans, either for modification or with approval. We did learn that a number of districts were asked to submit their plans early, their health and safety plans for reopening schools early. And we probed a little bit into that, and what that revealed was there were a number of quote unquote model districts that they're looking to see what plans are looking like, and they're scattered around the state. And I think it's helping the Department of Education understand what type of information is going to be in these plans and how much staff they need to review these plans.
Darlene.
Just a couple of questions. Primarily, what is the current thinking around how we're going to manage students outside of the classroom in areas like recess or in larger group settings such as gym class or the cafeteria?
So let's take cafeteria first, and I'll give you an example of a building where we have some good real estate, and then a building where we struggle a little bit with space. So when we think about Maple Glen Elementary, Maple Glen, the cafeteria, stage area, and the large group room is a really big space. So because one grade level eats at a time, we have the ability between the stage and the actual cafeteria space and large group space to spread kids out. At Jaredtown, we struggle a little bit more with space because when you think about their cafeteria, it really is undersized. So we're looking at cafeteria, stage, and one other location, most likely a classroom that's in close proximity to the cafeteria, so that we have three areas. And right now, Jaredtown's biggest class for next year is, I want to say, 84 students. So when you think of a number of students in the cafeteria and then a number of students at each in each satellite location, we feel confident that we can space kids out. So we are looking at the footprint of each cafeteria and the footprint of each building to determine how to best reduce numbers, not just where we can, but where we should. So that's being taken care of. Health and physical education classes, much like our athletes are doing with conditioning, there's going to be less of contact games, sports, and more individualized fitness activities. So when you think of our gyms, in all of our buildings, we have the space to be able to adequately space kids out. when we're talking about recess, thinking differently about outside space. So yes, we have dedicated playgrounds, but those are not the only areas where we can have kids engaged in recess. And so how can we use the dedicated playgrounds, and how can we use other space on the footprint of each, or within the footprint of each building property to spread kids out. And it will take some extra supervision to make sure that kids are not congregating at recess.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Dr. Yanni on this presentation? Okay, seeing none, let's move on to the regular meeting. Starting with Mr. Leckman, are there any announcements?
There are no announcements.
Okay, thank you. We do have minutes from our June 17th Finance Committee meeting, and let me just remind the board that at our last legislative meeting, we passed a change to Local Board Procedure 006, which changes the way we handle committee minutes. The way committee minutes are now handled is that they are approved by the committee at the subsequent committee meeting, and then presented to the legislative meeting as an informational item. So at this meeting, as we always did before, but we need to approve last month's minutes. They're not attached to the agenda, but they are always available directly through board docs. You can go back to the previous meeting and look at the minutes. So are there any concerns about approving those minutes from the committee? Okay, seeing none, those minutes are approved. And we will move on to the reports and recommendations, starting with the Ruvna app. Help with
Very good. It's Ruvna. It's Ruvna.
Ruvna, thank you. The Ruvna app for health and safety.
You should have saw the inventive spelling I came up with. I didn't think it was as easy as R-U-V-N-A, but sure enough, it is. Right now, we use Ruvna to track students during emergency drills. So when you think of an elementary school, you have a fire drill. It's typically the teacher and the kid goes out, stands in a designated area, and it's pretty easy to manage. Middle school and high school is much more difficult to manage. And so what Ruvna is, or if you're in class change time, you're in lunch, whatever, it's much more difficult. So what Ruvna is, it's a real-time attendance tracking app to be used during emergency drills and actual emergencies that provide real-time attendance updates that exchange between Ruvna and Infinite Campus. So if, let's say, the 9 board members are my students, we have an emergency, I'm outside, and I don't have Amy Francic and Darlene, I know the kids that I do have, and then everyone else that's using the app, school staff knows that we need to locate 2 students. So we already have the basic features of Ruvna budgeted for in our operating budget. What we're looking to do, Ruvna has come up with a health screening portal where we can actually devise questions, health questions that get pushed out in a text message, a secure text message that would, families would answer each morning before their students would come to school. Or have you experienced a fever in the last 24 hours? Are you experiencing any other COVID-19 like symptoms? And what that does is 2 things. If someone reports that they're experiencing symptoms, it allows the school to intervene and say, today might be a day that you should stay home or seek medical attention. And it also will give us aggregate data at any moment so that we could see the number of kids that are not in school and the reasons why they're not in school. We would be using either CARES or ESSER funds for this purchase for this year. We would evaluate its effectiveness beyond the pandemic to see if, well, during the pandemic to see if we would, if there would be a need for it beyond the pandemic. But we've investigated a number of tools and a number of options, And the way that this is, by our estimation, the safest way to collect this information so that we don't have information breaches about student health data. Like some districts are talking about doing this through a Google Doc. I'm not there. I'm worried about student health data in a Google Doc. A very limited number of people would have access to the data in RoofNet, and it's all encrypted.
Okay, comments or questions? Titia?
Yeah, I think, Dr. Yanni, you were just getting to the area where I had a question. The app would be just accessible to administrators, or are individual teachers expected to have access to it during like drills?
So teachers, our staff, anyone that uses it has access to the side of the application for drills. The health information, we would be able to route that to a select number of people: building principal, building nurse, district office administrators. So that would not be open access to staff. It would be a very controlled group of people.
Okay, thanks.
Other comments or questions on this item? And so do we foresee this annual cost of $19,590? Is this something you foresee using going forward, or is this a COVID-19 during the, hopefully there's someday there's an end to this? And so is does
Sure.
this, how do you foresee this going?
So the safety portion of the app, we will use, we'll evaluate each year, but the additional cost for the health portal will go away most likely at the end of COVID.
Okay, thank you. All right, so members of the committee, are we good to move this forward to the legislative meeting? And yes, all right.
Yes.
So we'll move that forward. Next up
Yes.
is the, I'm sorry, was there somebody else?
No, yes, go ahead.
All right, thanks, Dan. All right, so next up, Sandy Run Middle School update.
So I'll start off, and then if Mr. Leckman and Mr. Lester would like to jump in. This afternoon, I had the opportunity to visit the site again and give a tour along with Mr. Sirota to Mrs. Ionity. And the board took a tour, I guess, just about 2 weeks ago. And there has been an incredible amount of progress made on the site since we've been there. The top floor classroom structures are being built. And we're starting to see rough-in of plumbing for bathrooms and science labs, and the planetarium is coming along. It's remarkable when you drive by to think that just a few months ago, the wrecking ball went through the annex, and now we're standing, in the middle of a site that is now starting very much to look like a school and bring the vision of the new Sandy Run to reality. So I'll let Mr. Leckman or Mr. Lester speak further.
Yeah, I'll just build on that. So all the benchmarks continue to be hit by the contractors. So the schedule's looking good still, even with the shutdown we had. They're still right on, right where they need to be at this point in the job. As Dr. Yanni's mentioned, in the classroom wing, the walls for the third floor in Section A are just about completed, and they're going to start the roofing structure and roof decking. And in the other section, Section B of that wing, they're just putting the decking down and should be starting the third floor walls very shortly. Steel has been up for the gymnasium. They call that Section C. It's where the gymnasium, main entrance, offices are. That steel is up. The roof decking is on top, so good progress there. And when I went in the other day, they had the plumbing, the rough-in underground plumbing finished for the kitchen area. And the other exciting piece was steel for the bridge, the connecting bridge between the classroom wing and right outside the cafeteria. That steel was set very quickly. And so great progress moving along.
Thanks, Mr. Lesser. And the only, on the budget, there is nothing really to update. Nothing has materially changed since I provided the full update from last month. So if there are any specific questions, I will certainly answer those, but nothing specific to mention on the budget tonight.
I really think kudos really to everyone involved, but again, I can't stress enough how important it is to have the right on-site professional from doing engineering, and we have that in Zach. And so, you know, proof is in the pudding. But, you know, despite the closure that we had and the stoppage that we had per the governor's orders several months ago, you know, we are hitting benchmarks, and the project is moving along really well.
All right, thanks for those updates. Stan.
Yeah, first it was a great tour that we had a couple weeks ago that was well attended by the board. Thank you for letting us have that opportunity. This question goes to Bob Lester. Bob, how did it work out with the, you know, we had that close to 4 inches of rain there last Friday. Did we have any of those flooding issues that we had at Sandy Run there last year where the water jumped the curb and went into the, I think, the classrooms or the hallways? How'd that work out?
We were fine on that section of the building. When that happened last year, some of the drains were blocked off or not installed yet where they were building the modulars. I think that contributed. This time around, those drains were in operation. We didn't have any flooding at all in the existing building. They expected some of the rain, so they did take precautions with some of the site work to make sure some of the socks were around. They checked them before and after the storms. The site handled everything really well. We had a couple small washout areas along Twining Road where those socks were that were quickly repaired the next day. They had to do a lot of dewatering around where they had dug for the foundations, especially where the auditorium is. There's, you know, all the pits that they had dug filled up with water, and they had to be pumped back out, but it really didn't cause any delays, didn't stop any work, and no damage to the site.
Great, thank you, Bob. Thank you for being proactive. Thanks.
Yeah, and I'll just add, today's tour was great, and you know, it's great to see to be there regularly and see the forward progress. The only notable water left at this point, there's some small puddling on the ground floor here and there inside what will be the building, but of course it's not enclosed yet. And the elevator shafts are swimming pools at the moment, but that's about it. It otherwise looked to be in great shape despite all that water. Any other comments or questions on Sandy Run? Okay, moving forward to the treasurer's report, Andy.
Yes, I do want to give a quick update on the treasurer's report tonight. So if you notice tonight, the treasurer's report is for the food service department for May. And I just want to take a minute. I think it's good to just review this every once in a while. So historically, the food service department has been on a 2-month lag with the treasurer's report, if you've noticed that when they come through. And what we're aiming to do, so tonight you have May on here, starting with August finance, we want to bring food service current with all other funds. So in August, we will have the June and July treasurer's reports for all funds. So they're together the same every month moving forward. So the food service department, again, just for anyone that might be new or a refresher, has its own fund for accounting purposes. So that's why you see a treasurer's report here for the department all by itself. And the food service department operates completely separately from the general fund of the school district. It's a proprietary fund, which means it operates more like a business, and its revenues have to generate, the revenues that the department generates must sustain its operations. So Kristen Deli, who is actually joining us as a observer tonight. So hi, Kristen, thanks for joining. She's our food service director. She's done an exceptional job at improving the financial position of this department during her tenure with the district, and I think it's important to know that. With that said, all the work she's done has allowed her to weather the current COVID crisis that we're going through, even though it's had a significant negative impact on the department. So if you notice on the report this month, actually on the year to date under the May 31st, 20 column, The department's showing about a $34,000 loss for the year through the end of May. And we're watching that closely as we close out the year. I expect that to be around $70,000 as a loss for the year. But when you think about it, you know, she's having to continue to incur all the expenses of her department because of Act 13, where the state required school districts to continue to pay all employees while only serving a small fraction of our students during the shutdown. We'll continue to monitor that closely, but I think it was important to just give a quick review of where we're at, and we'll continue to monitor it closely into next year as well. But Kristen's doing a great job with the department. So I'll stop there and take any questions.
I mean, just to say, just really briefly, not only is Kristen doing a great job with the department, she's absolutely gone out of her way for our families during the COVID-19 closure. So we don't want that to go unnoticed as well. So thank you, Kristen.
Yeah, so great. Thank you. Kudos to Kristen. Thank you for the report. And I'm certainly appreciative of getting the food service reports caught up with the others. Any other comments or questions from the committee or the board? Okay, thanks. So we'll move those forward and review them at the legislative meeting. And we're up to budget estimates for the year just ended.
Yep, so just as I've been doing every month up to this point, I've been giving a quick update on where we're at with the 1920 budget. So included tonight is a similar presentation that I've given at prior meetings just to be consistent. So I want to just walk through this quickly tonight. There's not a whole lot of changes from what we've looked at in prior months, and then certainly open it if there's any questions. So next slide, please, Brooke. So even though we are in July and the fiscal year ended as of June 30th, it's still projections at this point because there's a number of open items as we work to close out the 1920 fiscal year. So what the projections include now are everything that we know of through the end of June and all of the estimates based on known factors and trends. So just to give a couple examples so you can understand, well, it's July, why don't we know what the end of June looks like, the fiscal year looks like. So delinquent taxes, as an example, delinquent taxes are collected regularly throughout the year, and accounting rules require us to record all delinquent taxes collected up through the end of August as part of our prior year financials. So we still have actually delinquent tax revenue to report, and we don't know what those numbers are yet. Accrued salaries are another one. So we have teachers that receive paychecks throughout the summer, and while we believe we have a very good estimate of what that is, as those payrolls get paid out, that gets charged back to the 1920 year, which is the year their service was provided in. As you do at home, utility and other invoices, but utilities as the example, we're still waiting on final invoices from June services to come in. And then we have a bunch of end of year reconciliations that we do. We look at open purchase orders and make sure we've received all invoices against them and do reconciliations. We reconcile all of our balance sheet accounts to make sure everything is charged properly. And all that work is completed by the end of August as we prepare for our annual financial audit. Next slide, please, Brooke. So the next slide looks at 1920 budget to year-end estimates. And basically, there's not significant changes on here. Essentially, when you look across all of the numbers, it's about $100,000 net positive to what we were looking at last month. So, when you look at the ending unassigned fund balance, it was around 7.5 million last month. Now we're at 7.6 million. And that's changes on both expenses and revenues. But again, the big one, I think, was earned income tax, and we'll look at that in more detail on the next slide. But we, conservatively projected receiving about 50% less. Again, this is projections, and we were only about 2% less in June as compared to last year. But overall, we're looking at about $100,000 net positive from last month. Next slide, please, Brooke. So the next slide is just our look at local revenue. And again, you can see all the details here. Not going to walk through this in great detail, but overall, we are about $230,000 under budget on local revenue. And a lot of that is from what happened in the last quarter of the year from COVID-19, the reductions in earned income tax, the significant reduction in interest income. So we're still monitoring all those closely. Next slide, Brooke. This is our earned income tax trends. It's just a slide I've been showing you every single month, and I don't know if you can see it. I have the pictures here on the right side, but June basically was about 2% lower than June of 2019. And again, I noted here that we still can't, I don't think, take anything specific away from that, because what's still driving this is the delay in the tax filing date from April 15th to June 15th, or to July 15th. So if you remember, in April, we had a 43% reduction as compared to prior year. June was only a 2%, but I think it's from a lot of people getting caught up now that the tax filing date is actually today, July 15th. So again, we're monitoring that on a daily basis. And just to give you an example, July month to date already, compared to last year, is about $24,000 ahead of last July. But again, I think until we get past the tax filing date, it's going to be hard to really understand what trends are happening there. And I still don't have updated unemployment numbers, so I'm still waiting on some of that to come out. Again, I've been sharing that with the board as I receive it, and I'm still waiting for some of that information to come out. And as soon as I have those real number data going back to, it would be May at this point, I will share that right away. Next slide, please, Brooke. This is just the transfer tax information. Again, just key data points that we've been monitoring every month. Transfer tax continues to be strong from large transactions. So in June, we had another large commercial property that sold, which accounted for about 30% of the transfer tax revenue in the month of June. So it was down slightly, but that trended positive the last couple months with some large property transactions. Next slide, please, Brooke. All right, expenditure projections remain pretty constant. We're projecting to end the year about $4.7 million under budget. Again, 3.2 million of that related to the operating portion of the budget, and 1.45 million from the capital reserve, which we talked about in great detail at the last finance committee meeting. So things are still pretty steady there. And again, we'll know more as we look out to the August meeting. And then the last slide is just all the details of the expenditure. When you look at why we were under budget, it's something it's a slide that's been as part of the presentation the last 2 or 3 times I've given it. I like to keep it there just so, next slide, please, Brooke. Just so everyone can see, and it's part of the presentation as documentation, kind of why we're under budget for the year. So I will stop there and answer any questions if you have anything specific you'd like to know about 2019-20 budget projections.
All right, thanks, Andy. We'll start with Jen.
Okay, my question is there a chance, like, since people are working from home, then this would be the primary town that they're working from, that would affect the earned income taxes that we collect, I guess, in future years?
So my understanding is that from Berkheimer, who's our tax collector for EIT, that changes after 90 days of a changed work location. So I think we're kind of past that 90-day mark, but it's really incumbent upon the employers that these folks work for to make a change in how they're reporting it to the local tax collectors. But 90 days is really the key of 90 consecutive days now of working at a new location. So if they've been working from home since the shutdowns occurred, technically employers should change the reporting location. And if they're from Philadelphia, then we would start getting that money directly, as an example. So it's possible, but that's kind of how the process works.
Okay.
Anyone else? All right, so the inevitable question that's going to come up, Andy, I mean, I appreciate having this last slide in the presentation each month, even though it doesn't change much, but the question is going to be, so we saved all this money in 1920. Is that a lot compared to how much unexpected expense we're going to feel in the upcoming budget year?
So, I mean, I look at that as, I answer that question in two different ways. One is unknown on the upcoming year on what's going to happen and what all of the costs are going to be to open schools and keep them open throughout the year. So certainly more to come on that, and we'll keep the board informed on that. Secondarily, if you think back, and I'm sure that the board is well aware of this, but for anyone new listening and anyone that's interested, if you look back to the budget presentations, you know, and we start to look out at our projections out into future years about how expenses are growing away from revenues, I think this just helps us sort of build a runway, because we're more than likely going to start to see real losses, real deficits in a year, and we're going to need to bring revenues back in line with expenses. So I think this just builds us a year and a half of runway more than it really helps us next year to fund COVID-related expenses. So that's my take on it. Does that answer your question, Mr. Sirota?
Yes. I just want to get the thought out there that, you know, yes, we saved some money in 1920. That's not savings going forward, and it may or may not even be enough to cover anticipated unexpected expense, to anticipate new expenses that may come up related to the pandemic. Jen, you still have your hand up. Did you have something else, or?
No.
Okay. All right. Any other comments or questions on the 1920 budget estimates? Okay. Last item under reports and recommendations is a settlement stipulation.
Yeah. So as the board is aware, and we always will, we have a number of commercial properties that we have open assessment appeals out there for. I continue to work directly with our solicitor and provide the board updates as we work through some of these. Again, just for anyone that might be listening, so property owners, commercial properties and residential, file annual assessment appeals on a fairly regular basis. And we get into a point where with this property as an example, in October of 2018, the property owner, there was a transaction on the property, and the property was purchased for $3.875 million. And the new owner said, hey, my assessment really values my property at $5 million, so I'm going to appeal that and request a lower assessment. The Board of Assessment at Montgomery County denied the appeal and said, no, we feel it's fairly valued, and then the property owner appeals that. And really the process from that point on is we either decide we're going to work with the property owner to come to some agreement, or we put it off and we go to trial and we incur costs and the like to go to trial and fight it when there's really risk that we could still lose, and it could be brought down to the assessment of the property owner. So there's a lot of value in many of these, with many of these properties, to work with them and try and negotiate a settlement. And this is the settlement that we've come to for 502 West Office Center Drive. The property owner actually had an appraisal done, and it came back at $3.9 million, which did support the purchase price. The board had our own appraisal done, which was slightly higher. But what we agreed to, and Valbridge and our solicitor agreed that it was a fair agreement, was to bring this settlement, which provides a reduction of about $16,000 in 2019, almost $14,000 in 2020, and about $19,000 as we look out to next tax year. So that's the recommendation brought forward and approved essentially by our solicitor and our Valbridge, our appraisal company, for the board's consideration.
Okay, thank you for the detail. Mr. Ropsky.
Yeah, Andy, on your PowerPoint for the budget estimate said you had a number of those properties for the transfer tax revenue. Were any of those properties, on the list for reassessment? And if they were they sold for a higher amount?
Mr. Robsky, I don't know that off the top of my head, but I can certainly go back and double check that.
Okay, that's all.
All right, other comments or questions on this settlement stipulation? All right, is the committee okay with moving this forward to the legislative meeting? I see some nods.
Yes.
Yes, and a thumb and a yes. Okay. Thank you. So we'll move that forward, and we are done with the reports and recommendations, and we are on to community input. So at this time, well, let me first ask, well, let me clarify for those who are in the room, if you have anything you would like to ask or comments you would like to make to the committee, please raise your virtual hand and I will call on people in turn. While that's going on, were there any comments submitted ahead of the meeting?
There were no comments submitted ahead of the meeting.
Okay, thank you. So the way this works, I'll call on you in turn. I will enable your microphone and I'd ask you to state your name and what part of the township you live in. And you'll have, everyone will have 4 minutes. I did see a hand a moment ago, but it's not there. Oh, now it's back. Okay. Okay, Mr. Kern, you should be able to unmute yourself and speak.
Thank you. My name is Lloyd Kern, and I live on Jefferson Road or Jefferson Court, whichever way is determined. I had a question regarding the property tax bill that we got this month. And I figured out that with the way you have your discounts and you pay ahead, you decide to take the installment plan, you make your you pay your first installment on time, of course, by August 31st. And then your second installment, instead of paying on the 2nd of November, you pay on the 3rd of November. And instead of paying your second installment, making that payment on October 1st instead of September 30th, or the final installment made on 11/3 rather, you're actually paying $300 more than the total amount that's due if you waited until the end of the year. You're getting all of your money 8 weeks ahead of the due date, but yet you're charging somebody $300 more, or 7.5% higher than the actual school tax rate. I think that's really inappropriate and doesn't make any sense from a business standpoint. I spoke with with Andy this morning about this, and I mentioned I'd bring it up.
Okay, thank you. Let me go through and make sure there are no other comments, and we will comment on everything at the end of community input. Is there anyone else who would like to address the committee or the board? Okay, seeing no other hands, I will end community input. And we will, is there any comment to make, Mr. Leckman, about that?
I can certainly share with you. I mean, Mr. Kern and I had actually a very nice conversation this morning. I appreciated it. I know we didn't agree on most of what we talked about, but we did have a very pleasant conversation. I think just specifically what Mr. Kern's concern is that he's bringing up is if the way that our tax payments are structured is, or the tax bills are structured, is there is a pay in full process, right? You can pay in full at the discount period and receive a 2% discount. You can pay in full during the face period, and you can pay in full during the penalty period. And the resolution that was passed this year, the authorization that the board had that we talked about when we talked about our resolutions, was we lowered the penalty period, the pay in full penalty period, to 0%, right? So essentially, if I'm a taxpayer in Upper Dublin Township, I have until December 31st to pay my property taxes in full without being charged a penalty. The other option that a taxpayer has, if they choose to accept it, is to go into the installment payment portion of the taxes. And Our installments there's 3 installment dates. And if someone chooses to go through the installment portion of the payment of the taxes, then there are dates that installments must be paid by. And if they're not paid by, so the dates, Mr. Kern's concern was, if I pay 1 day after, the installment due date, then I'm assessed a penalty of 10%. And he doesn't agree with that. That anyone should be assessed a penalty, when if you pay in full, you can wait till the end of the year and not be assessed such a penalty until it's turned over or delinquent to the county. So that's the concern that was brought up, and those are the resolutions that are in place. The board took the stance of 0% penalty, which we were authorized to do, but the installment is a completely separate process that a taxpayer would go through, and there are timelines as such.
Right. So it sounds like when we made that, when we approved that change to the payment period, we did not simultaneously approve a change to the installment system, and I don't actually know legally whether that's something we have the authority to do. I see you shaking your head, Mr. Lechman. So. Yeah, that's an unfortunate thing that in there are certain limitations we have with what we're allowed to do. Some of this stuff is in school code, and we can't actually change it if we wanted to. Although we didn't at this committee level discuss the installment period at all, that I recall, probably because we didn't have any authority to change it. So that's an unfortunate. Sounds like an unfortunate little mess there. I hope we don't. Trap anybody in that, but I'm not sure that there's anything we can do about it. I do want to announce, by the way, that we did lose some board members and presumably probably some other attendees to a power outage in the Fort Washington area. I see some of them calling back in, so we'll do our best with those who are here. Mr. Lechman, you had something else to say.
Yeah, I just want to make sure on that. I don't feel like there's a gotcha here. I want to be careful about that. So I don't think it's unfortunate. I mean, on the bill, there is a section that clearly lays out, if you choose the installments, it lists the dates, it lists the date if paid by, the due date, it lists the amount if paid by, not paid by the due date. So it's clearly listed on the bill there. I certainly understand the concern, but if there is no due date and nothing associated, there is no way for the taxpayer or the tax collector to collect that process with any fidelity. I mean, everyone could just pay the first one and then wait till the end of the year. So the installment process really is a whole separate payment model that wouldn't even be possible to administer if no one had an incentive to pay by. So that's why there's really no authority there.
Yeah, I'm looking at my tax bill here, and I agree, it looks fairly clear, although you would actually have to sort of do the math yourself to determine which strategy works best for you. Mr. Rofsky, you have your hand up.
Mark, you just said what I was going to say. Yeah, it just makes sense to make installments to yourself and then pay it at the end of the year. I mean, gosh, if you really look at it.
Yeah. All right, so thank you. We are finished with that. The next Finance Committee will be Wednesday, August 19th at 6:00 p.m. I don't think we know for sure yet whether that will be in person or here on Zoom, but we will make that announcement in due time. And we are adjourned. Thank you all.
Wait.
Oh, sorry, what did I miss?
Yeah, I just want to say, Dr. Yanni, thank you for that wonderful presentation at the beginning of the meeting. It was very informative. You had all the answers. You did your homework. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Dan. All right, and with that, I should ask, does anyone else have any end of meeting comments? All right, we are adjourned. Thanks for attending.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.